Okay, we'll make a start. If you can take your seats and get ready for the afternoon session. Hope you managed to get outside for a bit of sunshine. I definitely needed it after being woken at 3 a.m. by the obnoxious Queensland birds that all seem to congregate on the balcony outside of my hotel. So I love Queensland, but your birds are, they're killing me. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I may get a bit random this afternoon. We'll try, hope the moderator doesn't go too off course. So it's my pleasure to introduce Margie Pembroke. So Margie's got the session straight after lunch, so be kind to her. Margie is the Library Systems and Copyright Librarian at Southern Cross University Library. She's currently heading the Esploro implementation as part of the Ex Libris Esploro Early Adopter Program. Prior to moving into the Systems Librarian role, Margie was the manager of the Institutional Repository. She's the convener of the Queensland University Librarians Office of Cooperation, Information and Communication Technologies Working Party. ICTWP. I should have just said that. You'll know what it is. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Margie. She's going to do her session Exploring Esploro, Migration and Implementation of Esploro at Southern Cross University. And I swear these titles are getting harder and harder to pronounce. Thanks, Margie.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming back from lunch. I'm going to start by giving you a brief outline of the presentation and tell you a bit about Southern Cross University, but you probably know that. To understand why we chose Esploro, it's important that I explain a little bit about the history of the institutional repositories in Australia. And I'm going to go over our current research reporting processes and our infrastructure, why we actually chose Esploro, how the data migration is going, because it is going, some of the planned and potential integrations and the ones that I'm most excited about, or we are, and I'm going to finish up on the benefits that we expect to see. So, we're a multi-campus regional university, so we've done very well in the last couple of rounds at ERA. So we kind of punch above our weight as far as research goes, and I guess our management is looking to actually expose that research a little bit more. We've got about 840 FTE, as you can see. We've got 3 campuses, Coffs Harbour, Lismore and the Gold Coast. 3 satellite campuses in Sydney, Melbourne and Perth, and 2 hotel schools, one in Sydney and one in Melbourne. So we're sort of covering the whole East Coast, and we've jumped over to Perth as well because we're taking over the world. Historically, repositories in Australia were obviously created from government funding, and most didn't actually become active until after about 2006. Our repository, not until 2009, and that was out of the ASHA funding. So e-publications at SCU. Our initial focus was on green open access, as were most repositories. And then along came ERA, which you can safely say hijacked most of the institutional repositories in Australia, and then along came the publishers, and they actually hijacked the open access movement. So with their golden hybrid publishing models, that really confused a lot of the researchers about what is open access. Anyway, in 2018, CORE began its review of the Australian repository infrastructure, and I was part of that review looking at making the most of what we can do now. One of the things that came out of that review is that the interoperability of repositories is of primary concern. So basically, we weren't leveraging enough off the technology that's out there. So, I'm talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour because it's really hard, I've got to do that, to squish a 45-minute presentation into 25. So our current infrastructure is a digital commons repository. And then we've got the selected works part of that, which is our researcher profiles. And then we've also got IRMA, which is the current research information system, which is managed by the Office of Research. We've got manual reporting of all our data and manual data entry mostly. Manual reconciliation of that data when it comes time for ERA. So we take IRMA and we take EPUBs, a whole lot of Excel spreadsheets, a whole lot of VLOOKUPs and a lot of coffee, and hopefully we grab everything. We've got no integrations between any of that. There's no workflows, and fully reliant pretty much on self-reporting. There's a couple of reports that we run out of Scopus and PubMed for EPUBs, and I think the Office of Research have only just got their Scopus integration working again. So it's pretty rudimentary. So this is the current submission process. The researcher writes a paper, gets published, woohoo. They download a PDF form from the Office of Research website. They press a button on that form, and if they're not using a Mac or webmail, it actually populates the address to, sends it to EPUBs, to the head of school and to Irma. And the head of school, they sort of go, yes, this is research, and sends it to Irma. Irma then has 2 copies of that submission. We've got people in EPUBs and Irma both beavering away, manually entering that data off a PDF form. There's no copy and paste facility, hardly even from those forms. So we wanted to simplify the process and ensure that all the research is reported, reduce duplication of data entry, because we've actually got the same person employed by the library and the Office of Research on 2 part-time contracts, entering the data into both systems. Crazy as. So there's a lot of room for improvement. So that brings me to Esploro, and why Esploro? It was basically an offer too good to refuse. Since 2011, when I first became involved in our repository, I'd been looking for something that did everything that bpress did and much, much, much more. Researchers shouldn't be wasting time entering data onto a PDF form, and particularly when that metadata is readily available on the internet. A system should have the flexibility to manage organisational restructures. So in bpress, that was quite difficult to manage. It should be a time saver, not a time waster. It should support all types of research assets, not just the ones that are traditional. So we are now able to support NTROs as well as your journal publications, etc. It should be able to provide advanced analytics to support integrations between the systems. And it should be flexible. Breathe. It should be flexible so that internal work processes can be streamlined, such as triggering acquisitions workflows for stuff that we don't hold. It should be simple for the researcher above all else. Esploro will support all of the above, and including automatic harvesting of that metadata off the internet. So it uses an advanced artificial intelligence algorithm to match the researcher with what they may or may not have published. I'll go into that a bit more later. As well as this, we'll be able to draw on the collective intelligence of you guys out there. Ben, shout out to Ben, XSL dude. So we actually jumped at the opportunity. So the early adopter program is a chance to influence the development of the platform and ensure that it will meet our needs. It comes with long-term financial benefits, but also with some risk, thus the shark. It might not work. It might not be delivered on time. It might not have all the functionality that we require initially. And to mitigate that risk, we were able to negotiate a very flexible exit clause from our bpress contract. And Ex Libris have been incredibly supportive and honest with what they will deliver and when. We're aiming for a launch date of November the 15th, 2019. This will be a soft launch, very soft. And we'll be running 2 systems in parallel. So Digital Commons will remain the repository, and we'll have Esploro running until we get it looking exactly how we want it. And we'll continue that strategy until the researcher profiles and the outward-facing pages of Esploro look how we want them to look. So, expect the unexpected when you're doing a project. I'm also the copyright person at the university, and we got lumped with a 12-week copyright monitoring electronic use the whole shebang, administrative units and everything, from April to July. So that was, the project was in full flight. So it's not negotiable, it's not fun, and you just have to do it. So we also had a new DVC of research start, and our research structure was sort of still being bedded down. So we opted for a really flat organisational structure within Esploro, so we could then move it around when it all gets sorted out. Technology services were also in the process of moving our finance and student system to the cloud, and that requires developers. We needed a couple of those guys, so we had to negotiate their release, and it sometimes took longer to negotiate the release than it did for them to actually do the work. But technology services also caught a technology change freeze and exempted us, thank goodness, from that, but they've been incredibly supportive of Esploro because they can see the potential. So it's been a process, but despite all of those things, we've managed to stay on track, and we're still looking at November 15th, 2019, which is okay. I'm good with that. So the migration has actually happened, or the first migration, second actually. So we've been checking that data now. Our bpress data was migrated using the document export function, and thank you to Bond for pointing out that that was an option, because we didn't know and bpress had not documented that. In the meantime, I'd set up an Amazon WS3 server, which contained all our files, including the selected works profiles, sort of a plan B. Always got to have a plan B. Ex-Libris were great with the metadata mapping, which we didn't have a lot of experience in doing. So we've migrated from a system that had like 13 asset types to one that's got about 50. So you can imagine the bpress data, the asset types were determined using free text fields in HTML. We had relationships in those HTML parts of the record, and bpress have been able to pick that apart, sometimes more successfully than others, but we're still working on it. It's not ideal to have your data like that, but we didn't have any other option to represent relationships in bpress. One of the huge pluses has been the ability for Ex-Libris to export our bpress statistics into Esploro. So they are going to come with it, which is wonderful. We're also fortunate, we're the second bpress library to go live, so University of Iowa have already gone live. I think they're doing the same thing as us. It's a very soft go live, while they sort all the data out in the back end. So we plan to go from that to this. So the researcher will write a paper, that's all they have to do. It gets published to the internet, we automatically harvest that. If they choose to tell us about it, they can via an online portal. We'll write analytics reports and send them to the head of school or research centre, and we'll drop an XML file onto an FTP server for the Irma CRIS system to ingest. Obviously a lot simpler, a lot less duplication of effort. So, one of the things I like most about this system is its ability to auto-magically harvest from the internet and match assets to our authors based on their research interests, their ORCID ID, the people they collaborate with. The algorithm and watching that happen is quite amazing to watch. They demonstrated it at Igloo. It looks at the name variants of the author, which are all sitting on the researcher profile. So you've got that ability to say, oh, Margie Pembroke is also Margaret Mary Pembroke. She's also Margaret Pembroke when she's in trouble, etc. So it'll just, grab everything. It's really quite amazing. We'll be able to workflow things that are matched via a ORCID ID to automatically publish, because we will know that that's the correct author. So it's going to be a huge, huge plus for us. Our current system is completely reliant on the author self-submitting their research via the PDF forms. So quite often they do not even bother to fill out those forms. The harvester actually leverages off the summon index, not Primo. So those of you using Summon will be fascinated to know that even Ex-Libris think that that's a better system. We are planning integrations with ORCID, Unpaywall, Figshare, Research Data Australia, And Esploro is also going to support OAI PMH harvesting and publishing to Google and Google Scholar. So they've been working with Google Scholar and Google to boost the results in Google. Go. So our data, we had 20,000 assets in e-publications and around 23% were available on open access. This content includes a defunct journal, a conference and theses. All of the assets on open access have been, all of those assets have been migrated to Alma D, and they may or may not be associated with a Southern Cross researcher because they could have been a postgraduate student, but they are associated with Southern Cross. Some assets in the series appear in multiple series as they are the authors authored by cross-institutional authors, and that's an example of bpress and its silos again. It was a really difficult system to tease out that, those connections. Our data collections are harvested to Research Data Australia and to our theses to Trove, and both of those harvests are going to have to be rewritten. In our initial go live, Primo VE will be used as a data portal, and I've got a sneak peek of that later on. The planned integrations are with the Southern Cross HR system, and so we'd never had a staff load from into our Alma, and the researchers were added in an ad hoc manner when they wanted to request or borrow. So now we are tidying up all that data. There were numerous errors with the data, the most drastic being incorrect primary identifiers, so the IDP wouldn't allow the login, so we've gone through and tidied that all up. The researcher load XML file is generated from the Southern Cross Data Warehouse, which was only implemented in early 2019, and it includes the API keys for our ORCID API, and this will be the source of truth for the ORCID identifiers across the institution. We plan to integrate with Alma, not only to provide comprehensive and timely update of the publications data on a scheduled basis, but also to get information on grants and include that into Esploro so that publications that have been generated from a grant can be linked to each other. This will give a rich picture of the impact a grant has made and a comprehensive view of all the assets associated with a particular grant. We plan to utilise APIs and widgets to generate embeddable publications information for the Research Centre and schools' websites, as many of these centres currently display the publications information on simple HTML pages that do not contain metadata links to the publication, nor do they display related content, so they're just pretty much useless. We'll also be providing scheduled publications reports to the research centres and heads of school. So that's what we're thinking it's going to look like on Primo VE. So that's our sandbox at the moment. And that's data from the initial, I think it's just from the sandbox, so it's a little bit, it's not how it quite should be, but you can see you've got your research centre facets on the side. Esploro offers the discoverability on Google and Google Scholar, and I should mention that discoverability was one of the things that we stayed with e-publications and bpress for so long with. They really rank highly when you do a search for something that's held in digital commons. So there's going to be a dedicated discovery portal with analytics, bells and whistles, as well as the researcher portal. So this is just a temporary display portal, but it doesn't actually look as bad as I thought it would on Primo VE, to be quite honest. I shouldn't say that. Sorry, Amanda. This doesn't want to work. That's the researcher profile page. Did I miss one then? Yeah. So this is the tiles of the researcher portal, and we're planning to embed them onto the website in pretty much the same way with a bit more, pardon me, a bit more information probably. And that's the researcher profile. So you can see that it's quite a clean presentation of the data. You've got all your identifiers listed there. You can highlight particular research. You can see the tabs across the top for your outputs, your achievements and your timeline. And it's actually a really nice, clean view for the researchers compared to what Selected Works is. So I've recorded the deposit process as it would look from a library staff perspective, and you can see there's no surprises if you are familiar with Alma. Esploro sits as the research module on the tab on the top navigation. Select a deposit a research asset and associated it with the organisational unit. Select the asset type, enter your DOI, and Esploro goes off and grabs all the metadata, including the additional subjects, abstract, and publisher copyright statements. You can drag and drop files onto the record and add links for remote access. Esploro has found the authors that it thinks might be Southern Cross affiliated. Pardon me, so I'll approve them. And you can add other contributors and check all the metadata and fix it up as you go along. You can link the asset to the grant it was generated from. Sorry, just still editing the page numbers because they didn't actually come across properly from the metadata. So you can link it to the grant, you can add abstracts. The abstract and keywords populate automatically. There's a Sherpa Romeo integration, so you can see what the access rights are straight away. And you can automatically generate an email to notify the person. So they're canned messages that you can type up in the back end and select which one you want to send, i.e. give us your accepted manuscript. And at the moment, we actually have to hop out and manually do all that. So it's kind of saving us a whole lot of time. And it goes into, like if you save it as a draft, it will go into drafts. You have the same little workflows as you do on, I think you might need new batteries. Oh, look at that. Did I tell you I was a systems librarian? Benefits for the library are multiple, but my favourite is that the data is automatically harvested into the repository. Our current data entry processes are incredibly inefficient, and as most of the data is manually entered at the moment, there's a lot of room for error. One of which is the process of ordering a publication for the library collection, if it's by a Southern Cross researcher, which you need for ERA. Currently, staff have to remember to place that order, and so, yeah, they have to jump out again and enter all the data again into Alma to make the order. Esploro is going to create a workflow for the orders after checking that the item isn't already held in any of our subscribed databases or electronic EPUB, e-books, etc. So Esploro also allows you to add multiple versions of a paper. Our current system allows one. So if I put my copyright hat on for a moment, this is incredibly advantageous. So you can add a preprint with full access. You can add a postprint with an embargo date. You can add the publisher version with no access. You can also add a link to the paper. So you can have 4 different access points sharing the one set of metadata. And I imagine when ERA comes along in 3 years' time, we'll be able to sort out something for the ERA publications to be exposed by Esploro. Researcher profiles at the moment are currently requested by our researchers who fill out an online form and supply a list of publications, their biography and a photo. The publications information is then entered into e-publications and then pulled across over into selected works manually. There's no connection between the publications information except the author's email address, I think, and it's really inefficient. It's actually you wading through a whole stream of articles that might be for that author. Esploro is going to automatically populate that profile and link the assets to the researcher. It's going to create records for non-affiliated authors so that collaborations outside of Southern Cross can be evidenced on the website. And this is a huge improvement on our current processes. On top of this, we'll be able to create and share integrations and APIs and widgets to disseminate the data across all our platforms, such as the university website. Benefits for the researcher are numerous, but the main one is the amount of time that they will save. With the publications data being harvested automatically, the only research assets that will need to be reported manually are assets that will not be published to the internet. The researcher portal provides an incredibly easy interface for reporting different types of assets. So for the researcher, this means minimal effort for maximum exposure. We'll be able to link assets via the grant ID to ensure that researchers are meeting the requirements of their funding bodies, and provide reports to the researchers, research centres and heads of schools. And the ARC advocates that publicly funded research should be made publicly available wherever possible, and at least the metadata must be in the repository within 12 months of publication. We'll actually be able to report on that and see where we're missing things. Researchers will be automatically given a profile, and that profile will be automatically updated. The profile will be fully integrated with the repository. The object's metadata will be reused in the research profiles, the research centre profiles, and on our website. The exposure of the publications and assets and saving time for the researcher. The institution will have a complete picture of all its research outputs and a single point of truth for publishing to its website. Administrative assistants will no longer have to spend hours adding simple HTML to web pages, listing of publications that's hardly discoverable due to a lack of metadata. We'll use analytics to supply the research centres with their publications in the form of an automatically generated query, and we will no longer have to rely on a researcher to report their publications before they get added to the repository. There will be consistency across all the centres in the way that this asset data is displayed on the website. And that's it from me. I'll pause there for any questions. Sorry for the talking so fast. You didn't show me.
Well, I didn't have to give you any dramatics for timekeeping. Thank you so much, Margie. I just want what you guys have, because I think that is just incredible. So yeah, yep. Well done. And I also learned a new technical term, automagic harvesting. So that's cool. I want that too.
I made that up.
Yeah.
I'll CC it. No, it's all fine.
So are there any questions for Margie?
Hi, Metadata from Southern Queensland. Just wondering, your research data at the moment, it's in the data warehouse. Is it, you were talking about the Southern Cross?
Not the research data. We've got, that's a data warehouse for mashing together basically the data from the HR profile, from the staff directory, the ORCID identifiers, and the IDP information. So it sort of all has to come into one place, and they mix it all together and generate the researcher load that gets loaded into Esploro.
Are you looking at using Esploro for research data storage, or even research data metadata storage?
Not for large data sets, but definitely for the smaller ones. So the data is actually stored in Alma D, and that is not an infinite amount of storage. No. When we asked how much room do we have in Alma D, the answer from a previous manager was, we've got enough, and I hope we do have enough. You can link to outside data storage.
Yep. Though. Are you doing that initially, or is that going to be a longer term thing to do the research data into Esploro?
At the moment, we've only got 47 data sets, so it's not that much of an issue, and the larger data sets are stored outside of the repository anyway. So we'd be linking out to them.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi. This is Deborah from Lincoln University. My question is about the actual full text. So does Esploro harvest any versions of the full text, or is it basically harvesting the metadata and then you upload the full text separately?
Okay, with what we're doing at the moment, harvesting from bpress, the document export function pulls the PDF in as well and links it to that Esploro record with the same, well, it won't pick up embargoed things because they're not available openly, but it is pulling over all the open documents that we've got in there, yes.
So that's the documents you've already got?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about for going on? So say a researcher publishes something today, how do you get the full text for that?
The accepted manuscript version, yep.
Any version?
Well, it will link to, if it's something that we hold, we'll be able to have your normal Alma link to the holding that we have, the publisher version. We will be generating an email to say, please send us your accepted manuscript on submissions. And it might be an email that has we found 20 publications of yours, here they all are, please send accepted manuscripts for all these.
Yeah. Thank you.
And it's a drag and drop, so it's really easy to put it on.
Okay, thanks very much, Margie. We've just got a small gift for you.
A small gift.
It's the same as everybody else's.
Thank you. Oh,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
So this is a bit exciting. We've got another New Zealander. So I'll just introduce you, Sandra, as you're walking up and getting yourself organised. So Sandra McKenzie has been a cataloguing team leader at the National Library of New Zealand, Te Puna Mā Aotearoa since 2017. She has over 15 years of cataloguing experience and is a registered member of New Zealand's Professional Library Association, the ANZREG. The National Library went live with Alma and Primo in 2016, and Sandra has been involved since the beginning and was co-lead of the library's implementation of Primo. So Sandra's going to talk for the next 25 minutes or so on a National Library perspective on Alma. So for those non-university people in the room, this one's for you. And I'm just looking at you, Lynn. Yeah.
Kia ora. Thank you for the opportunity to share a National Library perspective, and also I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank ANZREG and Ex Libris for the sponsorship to attend Igloo in Singapore. The title of this presentation is A National Library Perspective on Alma, in part because it is a perspective from only one National Library, but mainly because it is only one perspective from the National Library of New Zealand, and there are others. So I'll talk about the purpose of the National Library, legal deposit legislation, our national bibliography, and the volume of material we face before I move on to Alma, challenges and then opportunities. And if you've got any questions, ask me at the end of this time, or come and find me for a chat during the breaks. So when you Google Ex Libris, the first result that I saw was Ex Libris, cloud-based solutions for higher education. The corporate website talks about putting the library at the heart of the academic ecosystem, but that's not what a national library is about. I've heard my national library described as the memory of a nation. The purpose of the National Library is set out in legislation, and it is to enrich the cultural and economic life of New Zealand and its interchanges with other nations. And one of the ways it does that is by collecting, preserving, and protecting documents, particularly those relating to New Zealand, and making them accessible in a manner consistent with their status as documentary heritage and taonga. Taonga is a Maori word, and in this context it means treasure. So I work in content services, and collecting and describing and making accessible the publishing output of New Zealand forms the core of our day-to-day work, and it's this perspective that you're going to hear about. So this is the building where I work in Wellington. We have two categories of collections. Our heritage collections are held permanently. The physical resources are in temperature and humidity controlled areas with no public access. They can be requested, but they can only be viewed in the reading rooms. Digital resources are held in our digital preservation repository called the National Digital Heritage Archive, or NDHA for short, and that's based on Rosetta. Within the NDHA, there are different levels of access to resources. Open access means you can view the resource anywhere, and others have access restrictions, and it can only be viewed on site in the reading room and by a limited number of people. So the other category of collection is general collections, and they can be borrowed and taken off site, but they're kept in stacks with no public access as well. The only physical collections that the public can browse are kept in the reading room. We do have some electronic subscriptions, but not very many in comparison to an academic library. The published collections, both physical and digital, are described in Alma, encoded in Mark 21 format, And the cataloguing standard we currently use is Resource Description and Access, or RDA, and prior to 2013 we used AACR2. The National Library also provides services to publishers and authors, including issuing international standard numbers, ISBN, ISSN and ISMN, and we don't charge for these. So how do we get the published material to fulfil our mandate? A lot comes through legal deposit, which has been around in some form since 1903. So it's legislation requiring publishers to give us copies of their material which is published in New Zealand. We work to 3 lots of legislation: the 2004 Books and Periodicals Notice, which includes maps and sheet music, the 2006 Electronic Documents Notice, which is our digital legal deposit legislation, and a 2017 Phonographic Documents Notice, which was really about closing a loophole regarding vinyl. There's been a resurgence in vinyl sound recordings. So as you can see, for physical materials, we get 2 copies, one for the heritage and one for the general. For digital material, you only have to give us 1 file format. If you publish your resource in both physical and digital formats, you've got to give us both. And we create a separate descriptive record for each, because we are preserving and making accessible 2 distinct objects, and each object needs metadata that accurately reflects its characteristics. So we're not creating records for our own exclusive use. The records we create need to work effectively for other libraries who may only have the physical resource or only the digital. The National Library of New Zealand is the national bibliographic agency for New Zealand. So according to IFLA, the National Bibliographic Agency has responsibility for the preparation of the authoritative and comprehensive bibliographic records for each new publication issued in the country, making records in accordance with accepted international bibliographic standards and publishing them with the shortest possible delay in a national bibliography which appears on a regular basis. So the cataloguing teams create the records that form the New Zealand National Bibliography, which is also known as Publications New Zealand. The scope of the bibliography is wider than legal deposit, and it includes New Zealand authors who publish overseas, 1/5 New Zealand content, or a New Zealand setting for fiction. We purchase material and accept donations that fit the scope but are not covered by legal deposit. We publish our records to OCLC and provide access to our catalogue. We do a monthly extract from Alma of New Zealand National Bibliography records, and they are available as a PDF, Mark or an Excel. And we also release the Publications New Zealand dataset quarterly for download in Mark or Mark XML. So now I'm going to move on to the volume of material coming our way, but do keep in mind that we are a small library from a country with a population of only 3.9 million people, and like most libraries face resourcing constraints. So the terms digital deluge and analogue avalanche are relative to our size. The volume of physical or analogue material we get is not so much about current publishing output, although physical formats are still a thing, but it's about what's happening in libraries around New Zealand. As each library assesses its collection, we get a lot of stuff. We get items we've never had or second copies of items we already hold. A recent donation from the Parliamentary Library resulted in over 15,000 items added to the collection, and we still have 400 boxes left to process. So in that digital deluge image, one of my fellow team leaders looked at that and said felt she was standing much closer to the wave. Our legislation defines publishing as making a document publicly available, whether or not there is any restrictions on access to the document. So it's not possible to collect comprehensively in the digital space, but we need to act quickly in the areas we do decide we want, and then when it's collected, it has to be ingested into Rosetta and described. So we're currently processing the largest digital legal deposit we have received so far. It was a hard drive with 3.5 terabytes of data, 250,000 files from over 5,000 New Zealand musicians. So we'll end up with approximately 6,000 bibliographic records and digital items. And if anyone's going to National Digital Forum in Wellington, my colleagues are talking about that project in detail. Okay, systems. We were a Voyager library for a long time, from 2000 to July 2016. Prior to 2011, we had 3 Voyager application support specialists who were part of the library. But when the library became part of the much larger Department of Internal Affairs, they were transferred to the IT team. They helped us with migration from Voyager to Alma, and then it was up to us. So we have no application support specialist, and we have no systems librarian. We have a distributed model, which has both pros and cons. So Alma challenges: the metadata editor, the lack of a born digital workflow, Alma publishing and Primo deduplication, and serials are our biggest challenges, and I'll look at each of these in turn. So the name Metadata Editor was a bit of a red flag for me and others. I create metadata, I don't just edit it. It's very clunky for original cataloguing. I often have Alma open in 2 browsers. So in one I'm creating metadata, and in the other I'm searching the catalogue or keeping my place in its set. Usually it feels like I'm working around the system instead of it working for me. There are a lot of annoying things that add to the time it takes to catalogue a resource for the first time, which is the bulk of the cataloguer's work at the National Library of New Zealand. There's an inconsistent display of authority headings, and sometimes quite a fluid approach to adhering to Mark 21. Not long after we first migrated, there were mutterings around the tea table about cataloguing in OCLC's record manager and then bringing our records into Alma. However, we persevered, and we're really looking forward to the new metadata editor. Alma has well-developed physical and electronic workflows and a digitisation workflow, but there is no workflow for born digital material, and particularly for born digital legal deposit material, though an idea is now under review. So in this example, Rex Manley applied for an ISBN for his digital publication, A Killing in a Concrete Forest, in December 28. It was due to be published in February 2019. We supplied the ISBNs and created a pre-publication record. We added a deferred purchase order using a physical workflow because there isn't a digital legal deposit workflow. We need to be able to claim the resource if it isn't deposited with us after publication. We did get a copy in March 2019, but we don't always have such diligent publishers, and we need to be able to chase them up. So the resource has been deposited into Rosetta, and the digital representation has been created in Alma. So now we have a physical holding and a digital representation. So Alma publishes a separate descriptive record for each delivery method, and they are deduped in Primo. Here you can see the publishing number for the digital inventory and the publishing number for the physical workaround inventory. This was a major problem for us when we first migrated, because the Primo dedupe algorithm was too blunt and too aggressive for many resources in our collection. Maps, music scores, serials, and rare books were the worst affected, but we kept finding others. So for example, on the left, there's a detail from a topographic map with contour lines representing height, and you can see rivers and other geographic features marked. On the right, there's a detail from a cadastral map which shows property boundaries. They both have the same title, they were published in the same year, and were put out by the same government department. The difference is the series to which they belong. The one on the left is in the New Zealand Map Series 260, and the one on the right is in the New Zealand Map Series 261. Conceptually and crucially for those interested in maps, they are not the same work, which is why they are in different series. Primo deduped them, and this is just one example of many. Verba was a big problem as well, and the feedback from the reading room was that the users didn't like it, and neither did they. So we could turn off Verba easily enough, but if we turned off dedupe, then we had a problem with our digitally born material. We would have 2 records in Primo for one resource, and one of which would lead the users absolutely nowhere. So back in 2016, our Primo implementation manager hadn't come across this much, and there was some delay before this could be resolved, and we were able to deduplicate by Alma MMS ID only. Serials are an ongoing challenge. Remember, we don't throw anything out of our heritage collections. Daily publications can be especially problematic. Now, all serial issues have item records created when received. In Voyager, we didn't add item records, so we used check-in records from Voyager to create item records in Alma. However, vast amounts of the serial and newspaper collections have no item records at all, and for many long-running titles, some issues have item records and some don't. It makes requesting very difficult in Primo. And although we don't have many electronic subscriptions, we do have some, which can put us in the odd position of having the physical title, the digital title, and the title available through an electronic subscription. Okay, enough challenges. Let's look at some opportunities. Normalisation rules, integration with Rosetta, new ways of working, and podcasts example is a new way of working. We use normalisation rules extensively, and we test them in the sandbox, which we love. We use them record by record. So for original cataloguing, we'll generally use some sort of normalisation rule. For a pre-pub record, we'll update the record, add standard fields and placeholders as a prompt for cataloguing. If we receive a different format of something we already hold, we'll use a normalisation rule to create the record for the second format, like in that sounds example. And like a lot of you, we use normalisation rules for metadata cleanup. And for bulk record creation, there's a monograph and series called Zootaxa, which is published by Magnolia Press, and we received over 1,000 digital publications from 2006 until now. So we had already catalogued the print. We used the normalisation rules to create records for the digital titles. And because it covered such a wide time span, we exported 2 sets of records, one for AACR2 and one for RDA. We put them into MarkEdit, we strip out the record identifiers, and then we import the records back into Alma and run a normalisation rule over them to create the record for the digital resource. Once those records for the digital publications are created, we do a bulk ingest into Rosetta. So we use the Update Bib Record API to map file extension information from Rosetta into RDA file type and encoding format, and we put in the track list from MP3 and FLAC audio files, and we put in the Primo link. And this is done when the digital representation is created in Alma. That's the link between Alma record and the object in Rosetta. So prior to Alma, we had a very linear approach. For physical material, it was acquisitions, cataloguing, processing. And for digital, it was acquisition, ingest into Rosetta, cataloguing. Now we're finding that approach does not work well for us, and we're thinking across the teams and in the order in which we do things. We're creating records from spreadsheets. We use the Alma functionality if we want to create short records that are later going to be upgraded, and we use MarkEdit if we want to create full records. So MarkEdit is not new, but it was new to us. Prior to Alma, the only people with access to it were the application support specialists, and we had to go through a formal process to get any work done. So now we're learning to do it ourselves. We don't have a systems librarian, but we do have a new role, that of digital collecting specialist, who work to acquire digital content, extract metadata from it to help with cataloguing, and they automate Rosetta ingest processes. The digital collecting specialists use the APIs extensively, but others use them too for straightforward tasks where sets and jobs in Alma aren't sufficient. So an example of a new way of working is the podcast workflow. The library currently collects about 30 podcasts, and when I started preparing this talk for Igloo, we only collected about 20. They cover a range of topics and include a Maori English bilingual podcast called Taringa. This is a partial view of a record in Primo for an episode in the Taringa podcast. The information you see is from a template, and each podcast series has its own template. The cataloguer creates the template and decides what information should be in it. The red boxes show the data that has been extracted from the RSS feed for the episode. That's the title, the series number, the date, and the description. So the digital collecting specialist has developed a series of scripts to harvest each podcast episode, as well as data about the episode from the RSS feed. And then the information in the green box comes from a spreadsheet created by the digital collecting specialist and filled in by the cataloguer according to the content of each episode. So the template, the data from the RSS feed, and the spreadsheet are the building blocks for the record, and scripts and the API are the tools that create it. And then there are other scripts that automate the ingest into Rosetta. We've ironed out the last wrinkles, and this is now business as usual. So we code the record from the previous slide as MGR, which means machine-generated record. And here you can see the huge jump in numbers for machine-generated records from 2018 to September 2019. And these stats don't include records that are created one by one using a normalization rule for converting a record for one format to the record for another format. I think machine-generated is not a really accurate description because people are involved, but the machine is doing the boring stuff, the data entry, and the people are putting the effort where it matters. And for the cataloguers, that's deciding on the template and focusing on names and subject analysis. So the National Library of New Zealand is charged with collecting and preserving the documentary heritage of New Zealand and making it available to current and future generations. We face challenges in Alma, using the Metadata Editor for original cataloguing, that lack of a born digital workflow, the Alma publishing and Primo dedupe and serials. These are the most significant challenges for my business unit. However, we are finding opportunities in Alma. Normalisation rules, using our integration with Rosetta, and most significantly, in new ways of working across the teams with new tools and new positions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. That was really insightful to me. So, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people with some questions. So we've got time. We've got time for questions. Are there anything that you'd like to ask Sandra?
What do you do with your original materials? Do you describe them in Alma as well?
No, we have a separate system for archival material. Is that? Yeah.
If no one's going to put up their hand, no, I've got a question.
Oh, sorry.
I have one of my own. You mentioned the challenges with serials. I was wondering if you'd managed to overcome any of those.
It's a work in progress, so no, not yet.
So maybe in the future you'll come and tell us how you overcame those problems.
Maybe.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Okay, so the next speaker is one of our sponsors, and I'll just explain. The sponsor, Kendall Barch, is going to be speaking. So Kendall from Third Iron, they are our gold sponsor. So as part of that gold sponsor package, they get the opportunity to actually talk in the program. So Kendall's going to have about 20 minutes or 20 minutes to talk, and there'll be the opportunity for questions. So just for those of you who haven't met Kendall or know who he is, he's the CEO and co-founder of the library technology company Third Iron. Kendall's worked with libraries for 20 years at companies like Cambridge Scientific Abstracts and ProQuest before starting Third Iron. So he's going to just lead us through a presentation. It should just work. Well, I love that theme. So Kendall, I'll open it up to you, and then we'll take some questions after your presentation.
Great, thanks everyone. It's a privilege to be here. I have an opportunity to come to Australia a couple times a year. Gold Coast is a welcome relief from where I live, which is about 3 hours south of the Canadian border, so it's already getting cold from where I live. And as the presentation title suggests, my ambition here is pretty bold, which is to talk about some of the big problems that we as a library technology company are working on. So my objective today is just to be quite open in terms of what we as a company are doing, why we're doing it, where we kind of are in the process, and what some of the results are of the work that we're doing right now. And before I get started, I just wanted to throw out kind of a business concept, but it is one that operates as sort of a directional beacon for us. And that is the concept of the job to be done. You know, if there's anybody here in the room that's kind of familiar with that, you know it's a pretty simple concept, which basically has to do with consumer decision-making process that holds that consumers will choose the service that provides the best, easiest, and fastest solution to whatever problem that they're trying to solve. So whether you're thinking about taking the train or an Uber, or whether or not you're trying to decide between toothpaste or how you're going to start your research, you can think about this in terms of the job to be done analysis to try to predict what sort of outcome there's going to be. And in fact, there's a number of companies out there that you can kind of look at it through this lens. So Nest is a, you can say thermostat company, but one of the genius moves of Nest was to look at what was a very conservative, staid industry and realize that people were not using or looking to use a thermostat necessarily to control the temperature of their house, but instead what they were looking to do was to gain information about how energy was being used in their home to save energy, to save money. That was really the job that the thermostat was trying to design to do. Similarly with the iPhone, news flash, right? Apple did not create the smartphone. They just created the fastest selling smartphone out there because they realized that the job that they thought consumers were trying to do with the phone was to communicate, not talk on the phone, right? In fact, talk to my 13-year-old daughter. She has a mobile phone, right? But she never talks to anybody on the phone. Instead, she texts, she uses Instagram, all that other stuff, right? So Apple had the genius to realize that the phone was not being used as a phone, it was being used as a communication device. And going way back, Napster had the genius to realize that people were interested in some sort of technology that allowed them to have a wide variety of music and to take them and to take that music with them. They weren't looking to buy CD-ROMs, they were looking to consume music in different ways. So when we sort of turn that same analysis as a company toward the library, toward the research process, we ask ourselves, what is it, or what job is it that people are trying to do? And when it comes to doing things like searching, after they've completed the search, the job that we think researchers are trying to do at that point is just get to the article, right? Sounds pretty simple, but what we have realized is that a lot of the existing systems out there don't do a very good job at that, right? And I'm going to walk you through a very painful, obvious experience, right? Great, I found an article, super exciting, something that says it might be available online. I go to a link resolver, right? Okay, this is not getting me to the article, but I'm going to soldier on anyway. What happens if I select some of those sources? Well, even though it's open access, I might have to log in. Right? Well, that seems to run counter-grain to the open access movement. Why am I logging into something that's open access? Or it made it fail at the publisher site, right? Nothing to do with the link resolver. It just has to do with the fact that there's something wrong at the publisher site, but I'm stopped dead in my tracks. Or it just could be a metadata issue. Maybe there's an umlaut or a comma or a quotation mark or something that causes that request to fail at whatever source that I've selected, right? So I'm stopped in my tracks there. Or it just might be the vagary of the open URL resolver that even though I'm trying to get to the article, I'm not brought to the article. Instead, I'm brought to the journal page or the publisher page or something, right? I'm not being brought to the article. Very obvious, right? But again, when we think about the job to be done, it doesn't really seem like there's basic, ubiquitous library services out there that do a very good job at that, right? And the funny thing is that we as libraries Oh, I should say too, and you probably hear about this from your end users. This is actually a heavily redacted tweet that I pulled off the internet a few months ago from a student at Northern Territory, someplace at one of the units in Northern Territory, right? You probably hear this, right? People tweet about it. They're voting with their actions, as I'll talk about here in a moment, right? But again, when we think about the job to be done, it's not going through a link resolver. That's not the job. The job is we want to get to the article, right? And as libraries, we've actually known that this has been a pain point for quite some time. And in fact, if you survey the published literature going back almost 20 years, there's been lots of studies, lots of discussions around how it seems to be that library services or systems don't really seem to be doing the job very well that they're designed to do. Just a couple of quotes there if you're squinting in the back. Going back to 2011 in the journal College and Research Libraries, they looked at SFX, older technology, right, but still same basic idea, open URL. They asked students to just find a bunch of articles and print them. Over half of them, or just over half of them, were able to complete that task, right? The other just couldn't figure out how to get access to an article using the link resolver. In the same year, in the journal Serials Review, they concluded that, quote, users just want to get the full text. They don't want to see other menu options, right? So we realized almost 20 years ago. In 2016, Rutgers University, so just a few years ago, analyzed their own library system. So this is a self-report. They published it. They concluded that, quote, users find the link resolver to be confusing, cumbersome, and unreliable. And they quoted one of their faculty members as saying, quote, the link resolver button almost never works. Right? Now, whether that's true or not, that's certainly the impression. And just a few months ago, researchers from University of Notre Dame in the United States and Boston College published a report in the journal Portal where they interviewed graduate students about their information journey. One of them said, library access is just too difficult and recommended that the library just do what Sci-Hub does, right? So we know, again, that when researchers come to the library, they're expecting a certain job to be done. They're not finding, by and large, a lot of the library systems and tools helping them do that job. So what are they doing? Well, we know that they're going elsewhere, right? So in the last 10 years in particular, there's been a fast-growing number of alternative services out there that help do the job that researchers are looking for, which is namely get to the article, right? Academia.edu and ResearchGate were founded. If you're not familiar with the Twitter hashtag ICANHasPDF, people go on Twitter, they say, hey, I'm looking for this article, they'll have the DOI or a reference, hashtag ICANHasPDF. Other people following that hashtag then will send them a link to that article or email it to them or whatever they want to do. And Reddit has a subreddit called I think Scholar, where people just go on there and say, hey, I'm looking for this article, help me out, right? And of course, Sci-Hub is the most renowned, or notorious, I should say, kind of alternative tool that people are looking to get the job of finding articles done. Sci-Hub on their Twitter handle a couple of months ago had an interesting statistic where they're now seeing 400,000 users a day. That's significant because in a recent STM report, they indicated that there's about 12 billion full-text articles, scholarly downloads a year. If the 400,000 users of Sci-Hub a day just downloaded one article from Sci-Hub, just one article, that would be almost 6% of the world's full-text downloads that they're effectively stealing. If every Sci-Hub user downloaded 2 articles, that's 12% of the world's consumption of full text is coming from Sci-Hub. Now, I say it's estimated 20% because that's just Sci-Hub. That doesn't count ResearchGate, academia, Twitter, or any other of the alternative sources that people are looking for in order to get access to full text content. So again, I mean, these statistics are interesting because it tells us that not only does there seem to be a problem, right? We can just kind of look casually at library services and say, hey, it doesn't really look like the job is being done here very well. We could look at the library literature itself about actual user studies that indicate that people don't find some services and tools helping them get the job done. But we can actually track now to look at what users are actually doing to say, yeah, there probably should be a better way to help get people from where they start their search to where they conclude it in order to get access to that content. So when you kind of think about or ask me what we as a company are doing, what we're thinking about, it is the access question. How is it that we can better help libraries meet the expectations that researchers have in order to get the job that they're looking to have done in a way that marries to their expectations. No small task. For us to do that, we had to reinvent a linking syntax. If you're familiar with Third Iron, we kind of call this we call this libkey. And it is based on a technology that has a few parts to it. One is that we maintain a knowledge base of article-level metadata from virtually every scholarly journal that's published. We are effectively a dark archive of Crossref, but we get article-level metadata from other sources as well, too. So one of the things that we have a broad understanding of is all of the articles that are published across all the different world's journals, and we do stuff to that data. It was great hearing the presentations today about a lot of the metadata and linking problems. Believe me, we live that world. We absorb the metadata, we analyze it, we vet it, we correct it, we restructure it. I like to say that we are actually probably the best worst customer from Crossref, since we are constantly sending them metadata correction requests because they just simply pass on the metadata that comes from the publishers. We let Crossref know when the publishers have made errors in their metadata to get the publishers to correct it. So we have a very good understanding of lots of article metadata across the tens of thousands of scholarly journals published around the world. That includes open access. We have our own knowledge base of article level status as well as journal level status, and we are also absorbing the metadata from OADOI, better known as Unpaywall. So we have a very, very good understanding not only of the published material, but also of open access. But we think that understanding of article data is important to allow better precision in terms of creating links. The second is we maintain a knowledge base of entitlements data. We understand from the 750 some odd libraries that we support across 30 different countries what their entitlements are, what journals you have access to from what sources over what date ranges, all that different information. And we now are at the stage where we can process and update all that information automatically. So if you're using Alma, for example, there is a publishing profile now for Third Iron where that information is sent to us automatically that we maintain and process. So the second thing, again, that we understand or that we know is information about your entitlements. Third is that we understand how organizations authorize or authenticate their users. Whether a library is using Easy Proxy or Open Athens or VPN or any of the regional varieties of different authentication systems, we have a knowledge base of how organizations authenticate their end users as well. So it's really kind of three pillars upon which all of the services that we operate sit on. It is, again, the article level metadata, it is entitlements information, and it is authentication information. And this has really just sort of been trial and error, and just through a lot of evolution of the company, we found that that is critical and vital information, that you cannot have reliable, durable linking out to content unless you know those three things in advance. And then what our services do is that we put all of this together in real time within milliseconds. So we have a very robust back-end infrastructure on the technology side, which means that when we get a request in order to create a link or send back information, that end user or that bit of information can come to us from a database, from Primo, from open web searching, and it could say, hey, there's a DOI, Third Iron, do you have any information about this? We can say, yep, we know about this article because we have the article level metadata. We know that this is coming from this organization. We know that this organization authenticates in this mechanism, and we can calculate all of that in milliseconds in order to deliver a link back to whatever service needs to represent that link, again, whether it's Primo or whatnot. So we can put this all together, and this is in a very big picture kind of way, what we call libkey. So our mission as a company is, as I said before, it's really about access, but what we mean by that is that we're trying to think about that researcher journey and provide a tool that gets the job done for them, and that's about simplifying and expediting the researcher workflow. But more importantly, it's about keeping the library at the center of that research process, right? Because you could argue that Sci-Hub also simplifies and expedites the researcher process, but it certainly does not keep the library in the center of the researcher workflow. So that's an essential part of what we're doing as a company as well. So, how are we doing this, or what are the solutions that we're delivering to the marketplace? One is called LibKey Discovery, which is a organic integration within discovery services like, for this room, Primo and Summon, but it's also active in EBSCO Discovery Service, in OCLC WorldCat, in smaller systems out there, open source, custom services as well. If there's anybody in the room running a front-end bento system, like for example, University of New South Wales has integrated our services into their front-end bento, but it's just simply an API-based service that delivers this linking information and other data elements organically and almost instantaneously into whatever service that end user is looking at. So if you can't see that from the back there or from wherever you're sitting, these are the data elements that we return. We signpost, meaning that we let the end user know what we can deliver. So within Primo, in this example, we have a link that says download PDF. And if I click on that, we go immediately to the PDF document. We're not going to the link resolver or anything like that. If you're familiar with this, or you already have this integrated into your systems, another advancement that we'll be making here within the next couple of weeks is adding the ability to link to an article that might be in HTML only. So if, for example, the article comes from an aggregated source where the PDF is not immediately available, it might be in HTML, or the publisher doesn't support PDF, we will be able to link to the article as well. So we're going to be expanding out that linking capability beyond simply PDF to do HTML also. So again, the user experience is rather than the typical kind of available online link resolver experience, click on download PDF, guess what, you go to the PDF. Click on get article, we go right to the article. The second thing that we're looking to do is to export or provide that functionality really at any point where you might be using a link resolver. This is a service that we call LibKey Link. We launched it initially for PubMed. This is an expanded service that we'll have available here again within the next couple of weeks, where you can use the LibKey Link syntax anywhere, and this is honestly the first time that we're publicly announcing this. You can use this LibKey linking syntax anywhere where you would otherwise be using an open URL base URL. So think of your favorite article level database, and right now when the end user clicks on the link resolver link, they go to the menu where they have to pick a source and go through that process. With LibKey Link, if they click on that link, we will first try to determine whether or not we can go directly to the article, the PDF, or the HTML. If we can, we bring the end user directly there. If we can't for whatever reason, maybe it's only in print or something, then we'll fall back to your link resolver. But we will bring people immediately and directly to the content when and where we can. So this is an example of what it would look like in Google Scholar. So you could use LibKey Link as your base URL within Google Scholar. So if your library links service is active, when you click on it, view it in your library, rather than, again, going to the link resolver, it goes directly to the PDF or to the HTML of that article. Third in our strategy is just supporting linking to content from open web searching. So we have a browser extension called LibKey Nomad, which again, if the end user is habituated to starting their research process on the open web, they just go to their favorite publisher website or to Wikipedia or to PubMed or wherever they might be going. We know that a certain number of researchers, that's just what they do, as much as we say they're never going to change their ways, right? LibKey Nomad, which is an extension that could either be downloaded by an individual or installed on an enterprise basis. So they walk into the chemistry lab or the library and they go to a publisher site. That LibKey Nomad extension will detect the DOI, return back information to me that indicates that this article is available for my library, and provides single-click access then out to that PDF or out to that article. So really with our access strategy, when we think about this from the job to be done, whether or not I start my research journey in the library, at my discovery layer, we're trying to get the job done by going to content. If I'm just doing searching in other services, Google Scholar or an article level database, rather than going through the link resolver, we go directly to the article. Or if the journey starts in the open web, we're trying to facilitate that better researcher workflow with the browser extension. So some of these services have been available now for over a year and a half, and we're starting to see some good results because of it. One is just our internal analytics. Right now, we are delivering about 2 million full-text articles a month via our API, and that's growing at about 50 to 70% per month. We're on track at the end of October to deliver over 3 million PDFs via LibKey. That might sound like a relatively small amount, but you have to realize that we're only covering or working with a certain number of libraries around the world. But what that indicates to us is that when end users are provided the opportunity to go directly to content, they will select it. We wouldn't see the API traffic on our own servers if that weren't the case. So it looks like providing end users an opportunity to go directly to content, they will, in order to get that job done, right, they will select that option. Second is there's some universities out there that are doing great work in just looking at how these services are being used by their end users. University of Manchester University is a great example in the UK, and there's two big important takeaways for them. One is by avoiding the vagaries of link resolvers, it's diminishing their help desk requests. So you're probably all familiar with this, especially during the busy times of the year. People have trouble getting to an article. They send a request into the help desk, hey, why can't I get access to this article? What's wrong? You have access to it. There's just some breakpoint in the process that frustrated an end user that generated a help desk ticket. LibKey has caused their help desk requests to drop by 25%. So there's a real material benefit for libraries in terms of how much staff time it's saving them in terms of implementing just simply better technology that gets the job done. Second is from the researcher perspective. Manchester also looked at how much time it takes to get to a full-text article with standard technologies. 5 or 6 clicks to get to an article, like literally how long does that take? It was like a minute and 12 seconds or something like that. Then they looked at how many clicks occur every month, and then they compared that to how much time it takes to get to a full-text article using LibKey, something like 3 seconds. And then they added up all that time and then compared it side by side. And they're projecting in 2019 that LibKey, just a simple use of different technology, is going to save their researchers a collective 112 days of time. So from the library perspective, that's actually very meaningful because they can report back to the administration that they're creating better workflow for researchers, which means that rather than struggling with library systems and tools, they're able to do things like teach and prepare for class and write papers and everything else, because one of the things that we often hear from researchers, the most valuable things that they have, the thing that they wish they had more of was time. So the fact that researcher workflow is more efficient, it's getting the job done in the way that they expect it to, is really validating a lot of what the kind of general benefits are of the library back to the administration. So whether we're looking at just simply user preference, reduce in help desk tickets, or time savings for end users, the benefits for us in terms of developing the technology on our end seem pretty clear. So for us as a company, you might know us as Browsine. Still very proud of that product, widely used, introduced in 2012. I'll point out Alan here at James Cook, actually one of our very first customers, still with us today, thank you. But we have definitely advanced beyond that initial product, using a lot of the technology behind that service in order to allow libraries to benefit from it in lots of different ways. With LibKey Discovery, which is our API integrations within discovery platforms, LibKey Link, which can be used wherever you might be using an open URL resolver, LibKey Nomad, which is our browser extension, and libkey.io, which I haven't said anything about, which is going to be another exciting addition to our LibKey suite the early part of 2020. Hopefully this has been useful, but again, when you kind of think about, hey, what do these companies think about? What do they worry about? This is what keeps us up at night. This is what we're interested in doing, and these are some of the reasons why we're interested in doing it. So thanks very much for having us, or having me, I should say. Thanks for everybody's support in the room. That's our current customer. Any questions at all about what we're doing? Back there in the room with my colleague James. Thanks very much. the stage here. Yeah, that was dramatic.
Thank you so much, Kendall. So you're going to be around for tomorrow as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so I do encourage you to take the opportunity to talk to Kendall while he's still on the same time zone, which is helpful. And I know that you're also very good at organising webinars with institutions, so if you think it's something that your institution might be interested in, I'm sure Kendall would be happy to organise something at a time with more staff.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Great, thanks.
Okay, it is time to eat again. So it is time for a tea break and a bit of a stretch, and then we've just got 2 more sessions after the tea break, and so it is kind of quite a full-on day. And so have a break, come back we're going to reconvene at 3:20, and we're going to have Melanie Fitter from Ex Libris to talk to us. And then I get to wrap up with my own session, which is really exciting, ANZREG business, which I know you're all desperate to hear. So have a break, and we'll see you back at 3:20.